I'm especially excited today because we have a special guest, Aubrey Shelsta. Hello. Here to replace Josh.
Always a good replacement.
Which she goes, those are big shoes to fill. And he goes, nah, not really. And I was like, yeah, not really. But we're excited to have Aubrey stay. Before I ask our fun question, Aubrey, do you want to just tell the listeners like one or two things about you? A little fun fact or something?
Sure. My name's Aubrey.
Who are you married to?
I am the wife of Garret Shelsta.
What? Wild.
Yes, I'm married to Garret. We have 4 kids. I spent the past 8 years staying home with said children. And then recently I went back to work. I'm a speech language pathologist. So that's been fun and hard also, but it's been good to be back.
You essentially have your doctorate in raising kids at home. 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Sure.
Which is going to become very relevant when I reveal our topic. Or I guess you clicked on this episode, so I guess you know. But before we get to that, I have a fun question for you guys.
Excellent.
And it is this. It's going to feel like a lot of pressure at first, but don't let it overwhelm you, okay? When I ask you this, what comes to mind? What was the best day of your life?
Wow.
Just what's the day that just comes to mind most quickly as you ponder that question?
I will go first. And it feels strange because I actually think it's an interesting thing because it's going to make it sound like the other things weren't as important. But actually, I would say when Jonah was born. Yeah. I think was probably one of the best days of my life. Not because Selah and Noah weren't as impactful. That has more to say about who I was in the ability to receive a child. The first 2, I was not in a good enough place. But when Jonah was born, I was in a better place to be able to experience it and receive it like Selah and Noah were as gifts. But I couldn't receive it in that same way. That's what I
totally get that. Yeah.
Also, when I married Aubrey was great, but Jonah was better. But we needed that one before we had this.
Do you guys remember, I'm sure Aubrey does, the time of day Jonah was born? Like around, like generally?
Yeah, it was in the evening. Probably 5 or 6, I think it was about then. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause then we came home. Our friend Karen King was watching Selah and Noah, and we came home from the birth center, and it was fantastic. It was wonderful. It's beautiful.
I love that. Yeah. I love thinking about that.
This is such a hard question.
I know.
Because I feel like if you're married or have kids, it's like an automatic answer.
No. My wedding day was not the best day of my life.
Okay, got it.
No.
Sorry, Jono.
That makes me feel a little better, I guess.
I'm sure a day with Jono is. I still have to ponder it. It's not about him. It's the wedding part, you know.
Totally.
I actually... And it's kind of funny that Josh isn't here, but I actually think one of the days that came to my mind is Josh's wedding. Because...
Yeah, you did love that day.
I all of my favorite people were there, and Josh is one of my favorite people, and we were celebrating him in May, and it was just so fun and special. And so that's one of my I would say that's probably not the best day of my life.
That's the one that came to mind.
But it came to mind.
That was a favorite day that I've had in a while.
Yeah. And what was really fun about that wedding is it poured down rain.
So rainy.
And that made it really fun. Mm-hmm. Like people just fully, I feel like, let go of like looking good or being proper because we were just soaked. And so we were dancing really hard, and that was really fun.
Like it started raining from the moment the ceremony began.
I know.
Like it wasn't raining, and then the ceremony started and the rain began, and then it did not stop until the wedding was
Which
over.
is better than if it had rained for like 10 minutes, because then you're like, oh, I don't want to be out in this. Right. But when it's just pouring, you're like, well, okay.
Yeah, I was officiating that wedding, and I was holding the umbrella and reading reading their vows and stuff, and my arm hurt. So bad by the end of it. I was holding it.
And the dance floor they got all their photos in before, which is perfect. Yeah. The dance floor was not covered, and so it was just party time.
We had a blast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a good one. Yeah. What comes to mind for you, Obs?
Well, I wanted it to be some kind of independent woman memory that popped into my head, but it was not. When you asked the question, actually the first thing that popped into my head, which was very unexpected, but was the day that Garret told me, or Garret decided that we were going to get married, which sounds really funny. But he decided. He did. He really did. Actually, Garret can be.
I've never heard this story.
Garret can be quite dramatic, as all of you. Well, I don't think that's surprising. But we were sitting in the car, and Garret got very serious, and he goes, I have to tell you something. And it was all lighthearted, and I thought, well, okay, what's happening? And he goes, this can only go one of two ways. And I was like, okay. He's like, well, one, we could break up. I was like, what?
I can imagine.
Dramatic pause. He was like, or I can kiss you, and you know what that means. Because Garret had committed that he wasn't going to kiss anyone until he knew for sure he was going to marry them.
Because I kissed way too many people. Like, that was the reason. So like
I did not know that.
I never heard that.
Yeah, so Garret didn't want to kiss, and then he just sprang that on me out of nowhere, and it was like, you have to decide in this moment, are we going to get married or not?
Oh my gosh.
How long had you been dating at that point?
I don't know. I want to say it was the winter, so maybe like 6 months. We'd known each other for longer than that, but
Yeah. And did you already know that you were?
I don't know if I'd thought about it. I mean, I was very in on that relationship, but I don't know. And so then I was like, oh man, I have to decide. And I don't know if I put the same weight into it as he did, but I said, okay, well, I guess you can kiss me. And then that was that.
You did not say it that way. You said
I probably closed my eyes and prayed, and the Lord probably told me. I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I think you did. You did. Actually, I was just going to say, you closed your eyes and you prayed. And then, which made it sound, that sounds very spiritual.
Yeah, I was very spiritual.
Was, is, present tense, and are. And the other thing is that you then said, you're like, I've known that we were going to be together for a long time.
Oh, probably. Yeah, that's probably more accurate. Yeah. It was like I had already made that decision and was waiting for him to catch up. Maybe that was more.
That was more so what you said. I was like, oh gosh, dang, I should have done this earlier. Like,
been kissing this whole time.
I had to wait. Yeah, that was a good day, I guess.
I guess.
That was very sweet. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, that is sweet. Man. Yeah, I don't know. I think I would also love for mine to be like an independent woman answer. But then what comes to mind for that is like career moments I've had or grad school moments I've had. And those are, I can't say are the best days of my life because they're also really hard.
Yeah.
You know, like they're not just like fuzzy joy. It's like you feel good because you accomplished something or you were honored with something, but it was like also really hard. So the thing that just feels like the joyful day that comes to mind is the day that Jono and I went ring shopping because I had told him a long time before that like even more than an actual proposal, being asked to look at rings and like start thinking about proposal actually felt a lot more romantic to me because I need a lot of time to make decisions. So he made kind of a big deal about asking me to go ring shopping because he sort of knew that would almost be in my mind like a proposal. And he just did it in a really special, cute way. Aww. And we just had the most fun day ever. He had made appointments at like Tiffany's and like places we would obviously never buy a ring, but like when else are you going to get to go?
Yeah.
So it was just, they like give you champagne. And so we like had champagne at Tiffany's and went to this next place and like went to lunch. And it was just such a joyful day because it was like not the pressure of getting engaged and all of the emotions that come with that. It was like a more lighthearted but still just as like romantic, you know?
They're kind of similar like moments.
They are. Yeah.
Like, that feeling of deciding and like committing but without all the pressure.
Yes,
sure.
Exactly.
Actual hyped up moment.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. So yeah. You know, romance. It gives you the feels.
It really does.
It just does. Which actually leads us into children.
Then comes the baby with the baby carriage.
Yeah, that was like the most seamless transition we've ever had and it was not even planned, but we are talking about kids today, and we recognize actually that probably a lot of our listeners, being young adults, college aged or right out of college, probably don't have kids for the majority of people. But I mean, Molly and I don't have kids, and we found ourselves even thinking all the time still, though, and for a long time, like for me since high school, how I want to raise my kids when I do have kids. And, you know, and Josh had said the same thing, and a couple other people. And so we thought it would just be sort of fun to talk to Garret and Aubrey specifically about this, because you guys have 4 kids.
We have an army of children.
Will you guys share their ages just for context for people?
Yeah. So we have 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. Selah is age 11. Noah is age 9. I'm going from the top to the bottom. Jonah is 7.
He's 7?
Yeah, he just turned 7.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then our youngest Malachi is 4, but he's about to turn 5. So he's very close to being 5.
Oh, man. And they are so cute. So if you don't know what they look like, go find Garret or Aubrey on the internet.
So you can follow me on Instagram. Aubrey is like very...
I'm not very followable. Findable.
She's findable, but you'll request her and then you'll just be left on request
for like a year. So they have 4 kids. So we thought it'd be sort of fun to talk with them and also share any like kind of guidance that we have gleaned from watching other people raise kids, from scripture, that kind of thing. And just talk about what does it look like to raise kids as you yourself, someone who follows Jesus. Like, how does that influence raising children? What does it look like to try to help your kids know Jesus in like a healthy way? Because it's pretty easy to imagine how that becomes really complicated. So I'm excited to talk with you guys.
Yeah, totally. Let's do it.
Ask you some questions. So the question I'd like to start with is, what is a parent's responsibility when it comes to raising their kids to know Jesus? You obviously want your kids to know the Lord and to have a thriving relationship with God, but like, you don't want to force your kids to go to church or do certain activities, right? So what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah. I'll start, and I'll just simply say that sometimes Aubrey and I think this is a really important thing, is that we aren't necessarily unified on how we both approach any of these questions. Not that we won't be unified on this, but oftentimes there's like when the Apostle Paul talks about mutual submission in marriage in Ephesians 4, like Aubrey and I, that's something that we are agreed on. And so sometimes like I might have something I feel strongly about, and Aubrey doesn't have a lot of strong feelings about. She's like, okay, like I can submit to that. Like that's totally fine. Or she'll say something like, I really feel strong. I'm like, I haven't thought about that at all. Sure. So like, we'll go with that. And sometimes we'll hash it out for a long time because we both have strong feelings. And sometimes it might take us a little while, and then we just kind of sense in our spirits or from the Lord or whatever that one of us submits to the other one's vision, or we come up with a third way. That doesn't happen as frequently. I think most of the time it's like she's like, I feel this way, and I'm like, cool, let's do that, or vice versa. Anyway,
because she has her doctorate in raising
she has her doctorate in raising children. Yeah. So I think. So that I'll just say in all the answers to these questions, like Aubrey might be like, hey, I don't know if I agree with you.
Sure. Just a little preface.
That's fine. But here's what I'd say is, I think the first thing I would say is that it is not the parent's responsibility to make sure that their kids follow Jesus. And because I do not believe that Christianity is an inherited faith. It's a faith based around people submitting to the lordship of Jesus in their life. And that requires a version of agency that people decide to follow Jesus. And that really matters. So is it my responsibility to make sure my kids are Christian? The answer is no. It's Selah, Noah, Jonah, and Malachi's responsibility to follow Jesus or not. So I think that fundamentally shapes how at least I think about it. Now, that does not mean that we do not have habits and practices and we don't create environments where following Jesus isn't part of our normal life. And I can talk more about that in a minute. But I would say, first and foremost, it is not the parents' responsibility to make their kids Christians. And there can be some confusion in that biblically, but I think I want to talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think that for this question, what comes to mind for me is really just how we interact with our kids. I think that when I have thought about Christian parenting for most of my life, I've thought about like how you teach your child about Jesus. And becoming a parent has made me recognize more that I think that teaching my child about Jesus is to trying to love them in the way that Jesus would love them. And the way that I view them being more in line with how Jesus views them. And I think that in the original, or in the community that we lived in when we first had our oldest, there was a lot of roots in a philosophy that children are innately sinful. That, that babies can be manipulative, that children cry or misbehave because they are now sinful as they get to be a certain age, that we have to teach them to repent and to recognize these pieces in themselves. And that never sat well with me. And as I explored, what does that mean? And I turned to how does God view us? I've come to just really view my children as these beautiful creations that God has made, someone who loves them completely, fully, and perfectly. And I don't really like to think of my children as sinful beings. I don't think that's for me to decide whether or not they are sinful. And so really kind of pushed away from that view of children, and trying to see the heart behind where they are at, that God created them to be these unique pieces of his creation, and that it's my job to try to find the heart and the core of who they are and help them navigate this complicated world.
Yeah. And I would say the reason that didn't sit well with Obs and I, because that also didn't sit right with me either, wasn't because that didn't mean that our kids weren't acting like punks, or it didn't mean that they were like angelic beings all of the time. It just, sometimes that sinfulness thing carries with it a level of rationality and intent that I just don't think applies to like a 2-month-old. I think that they are, how I would maybe phrase it a little differently than Obs, is they're finite creatures with finite needs getting met with the finite resources that they've been shown how to meet them. Originally, it's through crying. Like that's literally the only way they can have a need met. Yeah. is through crying. And so as they learn to do that, and as it become more complicated, then intent can become can emerge. But I think that predominantly it's just that we had a hard time saying like, oh, they're sinful. And I think what the Apostle Paul would say is that that while we are like I think he would say we were sinful from the womb, but I think that as you look at that and you interpret it in the mass of Paul's writings, that just means that they are finite creatures with finite perspectives, and they don't have all of the abilities to do the things that they need to be to find wholeness, and they might not understand how good the source of Jesus is yet. Whether that's because of cognitive development or whatever. There's a lot of reasons for that. So I don't know. That's how I would just riff on what you were saying.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And what I was hearing you say too, Aubrey, is a little bit of like a change from the emphasis being on teaching your kids about Jesus to just like slightly shifting the emphasis to loving your kids like Jesus and like seeing them for the unique creations they are and putting your intention into loving them the way Jesus does. And that shift is so profound to me. Yeah. Like when I don't know, when I think about that, I think it sort of takes the pressure off of knowing all the right things too, or like having the perfect communication style, and actually puts more of an onus, I would imagine, on your own relationship with the Lord and where are you being fulfilled so that you can overflow that love onto your kids. Does that sort of sit true with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely it does. Because I can't love my child unless I'm experiencing the love of God, and unless I'm able to see myself as complete in God. Only from that place can I love somebody else well. And like Garret said something about, I don't know, you talked about babies crying or whatever, but I think that carries over well beyond the baby and toddler years. I think that discipline is something that's talked a lot about in church, or at least I have heard discipline talked a lot about in church. And while I don't have a problem with the concept in general necessarily, I don't find that word to be very helpful in my parenting, because it makes things become so right and wrong. Like, this is the right way to act and this is the wrong way to act. And I feel like, I mean, yes, our children have all kinds of behaviors that I would like to shape and guide, and sometimes their behaviors are very inappropriate. But we attempt to try to see like what's going on beyond that, rather than this, you've done this action, and so now that's not right, and so you are punished for that action, rather than what is happening within you and from where is this action being birthed. And that's how I feel like Jesus sees us. You know, Jesus doesn't see, you know, my negative behaviors and just want to discipline those. Jesus wants to come into where I am, and Jesus wants to heal me or guide me from, you know, this beautiful core that he's created, and bring me back to that so that I make a different choice in my life.
Yeah.
That is so helpful. I think that holistic understanding, it makes me think about this phrase that we used to use at the camp that I worked at, and it was, more is caught than taught. And that's what came to my mind as you were talking about teaching versus loving. And obviously teaching has an impact on people. And I imagine you would say that you do teach your kids.
Yes.
But it's almost a harder calling and a higher calling to understand that the things you're not trying to teach your kids, they're still seeing anyway. They're seeing the way you talk to each other. They're seeing the way, like, you handle their behavior. They're seeing the way, I mean, things that you wouldn't even imagine kids are seeing and learning from, they are picking up and learning from, which is, it's just, to me, it just makes me think of what a high calling it is to recognize that your whole life is on display for your kids to learn from, all the good parts and all the like difficult parts. Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, it is an interesting, at least for me, in that as particularly as the girls have gotten older, because, you know, there's a certain amount that the boys and all the kids when they were younger, you know, that we could read a Bible story or whatever, but like, both Aubrey and I are highly skeptical of children's Bibles, because sometimes they like take these really complex and nuanced stories and then make them about things that they aren't, like
the Book of Jonah.
Like the Book of Jonah, like we're redoing the Book of Jonah right now. Where it's like, oh, there's a fish in it, and that's cute for kids, or like Noah's Ark, which is like about God's existential crisis of destroying the world. It's like it has animals in a boat, you know, and so like I think. So we at least I didn't very frequently want. I think one of the biggest things that we've thought about in our parenting, particularly around Jesus, is that undoubtedly there are going to be things that they have to unlearn about the ways that we've helped them understand not just the world, society, culture, ideology, and included in that, and most importantly, is Jesus. So if I'm not really sure about something for my kids, I'm not going to teach them. So I don't want to have them undo something. Like last night, I went upstairs and Noah was reading a children's Bible, and I almost wanted to take it from her.
Get that Bible out of your hands.
Nope.
Which could have also damaged her.
Yes, I didn't. I let her read her Bible.
But that's such a good point. Imagine how disorienting it is for you to be like, oh, the Noah's Ark, like as a kid, have this understanding.
No, totally.
And then you're 18 and you're like, wait, what? It's about what?
Noah's in a floating coffin with death underneath him? That's wild.
That's probably why we have so much
deconstruction. Absolutely. I mean, so I think that's been something that Aubrey and I have had as a guiding philosophy for us is we want to show them and teach them the things that we know are true. And even Selah just started going to the middle school youth ministry at our church. Like this week was her first time ever. She just got into 6th grade and she's been going. She's been in soccer all fall, and this is the first moment she got her vaccinations and she can finally go. And
she was so excited.
She was so excited.
It just warms my heart so much.
And we were on our way home, and I was asking her about the talk that was happening, and she's like, it was in the book of Acts. And I suddenly found myself anxious because I was like, and this was about me. Yeah. So I'm like, we haven't read the book of Acts as a family. And I've done this very intentionally. We've only read the Gospels over and over again. We just go through them when I'm reading them with the kids. We're just different versions of the Gospels because what I understand is that the lens by which we see all of Scripture is Jesus. So if I can get them in the story of Jesus for their entire childhood as frequently as possible, I can have them wrestle with Paul's complex theology in Romans later. I just want them to know who Jesus is, how he operates and works. And I found myself being like, oh no, the pastor's kid doesn't know the book of Acts. And I was like, no, but she can name for you any story, and she might not know chapter and verse, but you tell her a story about Jesus and she'll be like, oh yeah, that's the thing that happens, or that's the thing that happens. And so that's been an interesting component to, and how that's been at least playing its way out in our life right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of speaking of the Bible, and you mentioned this earlier, G, that there is some biblical guidance on how to raise kids. Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about what you understand some of those verses to mean?
Sure. I mean, so here's what I'd say is that part of the reason I feel like in the broader church culture at large, it's a little confusing for us about what it means to make Christian kids or whatever, is because the Bible has kind of two distinct movements of how God's desires for the world expanded. The whole Old Testament was predominantly expanded through the enculturation of Hebrews with the law as they passed it on to their kids. That was the entire way that God's kingdom expanded. So if you read at the beginning of the book of Exodus, the reason that the Hebrews were a threat to the empire was because they had so many kids. Because then the parents would instill the values of of following Yahweh into their kids, and it upended their entire society, and they became a threat. That was the vision. Just have kids, help them understand the law, circumcise your kids, circumcise your boys, and then God's desire for the world will expand because he's going to bless Israel so intensely that the entire world would come and be part of it. However, then this is the reason why Jesus and Paul begin to upend all of it, because all of a sudden non-ethnic Jews could participate in the expansion of God's kingdom through the practice of recognizing the lordship of Jesus in their life. And so the thing that all of a sudden happens, and I think we said this on the podcast before, in the time of Jesus and in the Acts of the Apostles, is that all of a sudden it begins to flip where God doesn't actually have grandkids. That God, just because you were born into a Christian family or a God-following family, at least in the Christian perspective, does not mean that you then are a Christian in yourself. That is a decision that you have to decide to align your life because the sacrifice is too great. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that wide is the path that leads to destruction, but narrow is the gate that leads to eternal life, because that narrow gate requires a lot of sacrifice and a lot of hardship, but there's a lot of beauty and joy that comes in the midst of that too. And so part of the reason that it gets a little confusing for us and we think, oh, it's my responsibility, is that part of the biblical witness is that. Now, I think those two things connect in significant ways. Before I continue on my monologue, I should probably diverge.
No. You keep going. You're really going deep here.
I know. Having my wife on the podcast is fantastic because she will, just like Kendrick says, stay humble. And so, however, I think that the thing to carry over to that is that does not mean that we do not create environments. That was a double negative. What that means is that we begin to create environments and cultures that the way of Jesus is the way that we think and operate and create rhythms in our life and family. Mm-hmm. The way that at least I think about it is I hope that my kids I hope that they commit their lives to Jesus, but I hope at some point it's just a foregone conclusion because they see the richness of how it operates in our life. Because, for example, I never ask my kids if they want to be American. I just assume they're going to be American because they were born in America. Like, that's not a cognitive decision that they make. But in a similar way, in our family, I don't want them to grow up thinking that we aren't Christian. Though at some point they have to choose to follow Jesus for themselves. That I think that Christian is a profoundly more important identity marker than American. And since my kids were born into a Christian household, I'm hoping that they understand and live and experience the fruit of a Christian family, that becomes just part of who they are, and that just ends up how they align their life. Now, undoubtedly, they're going to be exposed to lots of other ways and lots of other philosophies, but hopefully that if what we believe in the Jesus following way and the Sermon on the Mount and all of that, then that life is so beautiful and good. Like, why wouldn't that be the thing that we do? Mm-hmm. That's a lot of responsibility on us as parents, but I think that that's the biggest thing for me to think is, I don't ask my kids to be American, so why would I ask them to think if they want to choose to be a Christian or not? At least right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything to say on this topic. I think you about summed all that up.
Oh, that's so
great. Well, and what you're saying, it kind of makes me think, and this is just a really honest question. So maybe you don't even want to answer it. I don't know. That's okay if you don't. I feel like when I think about having kids and, hoping that kind of the fruit of mine and Jono's Christian marriage and the type of home we want to create, exactly like you're saying, my hope for our future children is that fruit would sort of speak for itself and that a relationship with Jesus would be cultivated for them, that they would cultivate that over time just by being in the environment that hopefully we can create. But I have some anxiety around that. I have some anxiety around raising kids as someone who follows Jesus and how to really create that environment. And I think part of the anxiety came from coming to college, and I wasn't raised necessarily to follow Jesus. And so I think I had a lot less to undo than a lot of my friends who I came to college and they had been raised in Christian households and are now deconstructing very heavily with parents who did their very best. And now they're going through kind of a painful deconstruction. Molly, I don't know, do you feel like people in a similar boat?
Yeah. Who I would say, like you're saying, parents who did their very best and parents who I would say killed it.
Yeah. And so it kind of just plants these seeds in me of kind of like, I want to do it well, but I joke with Jono sometimes. I'm like, man, people who didn't grow up Christian tend to have a lot healthier faith than people who did. And that is a way oversimplification and an exaggeration, but that is sort of like the observation that I've made. And I guess I'm just curious, like your guys' thoughts on that. If you ever worry about that, if you know, if your kids grow up to maybe follow Jesus, but believe really, really differently than you, if that feels nerve-wracking to you or not so much. Yeah.
Well, I think I relate. I mean, at least at one point I relate to that. I remember feeling like, you know, what if this or what if that or what if this? Mm-hmm. And there's all this pressure, right? But my whole parenting journey has been constantly learning to let go. And I think I have a very long road ahead of me. But I think up to this point, I've learned that I, at some point, am going to have to let go of everything that I ever thought that my kids would be, right? I had to let go of them sleeping through the night. That was physically really hard, right? I had to let go of birth being a certain way. From the beginning, in birth, you have to let go, right? I had to let go of what they were interested in. I had to let go of how they did something. I had to let go of when they learned to do something. I have to let go of what their relationships look like with each other. And I think that there's a lot more letting go in my future as they become more free thinkers and more influenced by outside of our home. You know, their world is still kind of contained within our home and it's expanding. But I don't so much fear anymore that our kids won't follow Jesus. When I look at our children at night, my hope for them is that they find their fullness in what I would call Jesus. And if they find their fullness in another way of articulating this spirituality, I'm okay with that. I just want them to find it within themselves and not outside in the world. Yeah. That's my biggest hope for them. And I think that I want to walk with them through anything that they want to explore or have questions about. I want to be able to show up for them in anything that they're wondering about. If they want to, you know, explore these different philosophies or these different religions, I want to be there with them. I'm not always going to agree with them or be on their side, but I don't think I think when we hold things so tightly, then it becomes this, you know, this thing like, one day I'll get to do that. You know, I think you see that with a lot of things, especially within the church, right? So I don't want my kids to finally be free to go explore all the things we didn't let them do. Now, I want to talk to them about the real consequences of these things, whatever they be, you know, be it drugs or alcohol. Like, I'm not going to be honest with them about
Sex.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
I have to start telling myself my kids might have sex one day. So I have to start telling myself that right now.
They might.
Let go of it.
Yeah, with someone you probably won't choose. Too far? Did I take it too far?
No.
I mean, I'm not arranging their marriages, so like, I'm not going to choose them.
Yeah, but anyway, just that idea of letting go, but being connected with them and helping them. You know, I always come back to this, like the core of who they are. I think I've already said it like 3 times, but that's what I try to see when I see them. And that's the piece of them that I want to love the best. So,
yeah, I don't have a ton to add to what Aub said. Is it's simply that I have a lot of confidence in who Jesus is, and I feel like he's a pretty compelling picture in himself. And I am more convinced in who Jesus is than my ability to help shape my kids to make them follow Jesus. So I think that for me, we've said this also on the podcast, but I'll say it again here, is like, Kenna, for you, it's all we can do is be faithful to that which God has in front of us. So success in the economy of God is just based around faithfulness. So what is God calling me to be faithful to? And what do I have to offer my kids right now in the fullness of I have? And that will require sacrifice from me. And if I offer that to them, that is all God requires. That is all he requires of me, is to be faithful to that which he has placed in front of me. And it's a huge calling. There's 4 of them. We're in the 94 percentile of number of kids in the United States. We are. But our category, funny story, our category is 4+. So like us and the Duggars are in like the same.
You're
4+. We're like the same.
Funny.
So it's not that I have anxiety about it right now. I mean, I don't know, maybe later on. I think that the thing that Aubrey said that I think is the most true for me is is continually letting go. I think, and you do that in little ways. Like she said, like I remember I didn't think Selah was really going to be into soccer, and I was really into soccer growing up. And she was kind of playing it like on and off. And then all of a sudden, like one day, she's like, I'm really into soccer. And now she's playing a ton, and she's fine. But she just loves it. She's reading soccer books. She wants to read soccer things. And it wasn't because I forced it on her. We just were there, and we were around, and we were talking about it. And I'm hoping the same thing. Like Aubrey and I did not say, you need to go to youth group. You did not need to go to United. She just is like, I think I want to go, because we've included her in a life of people. Like obviously she works at, like I work there.
She works there.
We all do.
She
but
does
like,
kind of work there.
She does. She's here a lot.
She comes here a lot.
But we just included her in our life so much that people that are older than her, like you two and like Josh and other people are like, oh, like Ashley, just are like, hey, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And I think that's been the biggest thing that we've learned is that we are the predominant pointers in the direction, but we're also their parents. And so around the opportunity of faith is, at least this is a way that I grew up, and this is something that I learned from my mom, is that really is a family affair. I mean, meaning that in the broader community of God affair. Like when Jesus, this is another thing the Bible says that's wild about family, is Jesus said, like, who is my brother? Who is my sister? Who is my mother and father, but those that do the will of God? So Jesus expands the idea of family to those who do the will of his Father pretty profoundly. And so as far as the responsibility to follow Jesus, like I have a pretty high ecclesiology, like a belief in what the church is supposed to accomplish. And so at least I attempt to try to incorporate our kids into the church community life as much as possible, because they're gonna, we make them read the Bible, but when they hear you two talk about going to church or things that you're learning, like that is, they're like, oh, other people that are cool do this too.
We're cool. We're cool. You're the coolest.
Yeah, so and it's really,
they're the coolest.
It's really profound, because like every time that I do bring my kids around the church, they're like, who's going to be there? Is Molly going to be there? Is Kenna going to be there? Is not going to be there? It's like they list off all the names of the people, and that to me is really important because of this, is that I know it's not exclusively on my and Aubrey's shoulders.
What you were saying, Aubrey, about kind of wanting to give your kids freedom to make choices that you don't agree with, or that maybe are even difficult for you to see at times, or whatever it might be, really makes me think about what you were saying at the beginning about loving them like Jesus does, because I was just reminded of, like, as you parent your kids, like God is our Father, and I just am reminded of that similar relationship. Like when I turn away, or when I make decisions that aren't in line with God's vision for my life, or whatever it might be, like I trust and know that God's affection for me does not change, and that God's ultimate desire is for me to want to be with him and be like him and live like he has created me to be, but that my decisions or my behavior like don't change that and will never be the most important thing. And I know that's even hard for me to live out like in my friendships sometimes. Like I'm like, no, but you're doing it wrong, or but you should be doing it this way, or but this has consequences, or like, yeah, I believe that that's true, but also make sure you do this right and this right. And I don't know, it's just such a refreshing reminder for me of God's character. And I mean, just the tension even that I'm feeling now as I talk about, I understand like a glimpse of what you're saying about letting go, that there is so much you do have control over, especially now as you are saying, like a lot of their world is within your home, but there's also, especially in the future, so much that you will not have control over. And I imagine that is like, I'm just thinking about like God's perspective in that. Like God does have full control and he gives us the freedom to choose, and we are going to make choices that are painful for him to see us make, yet his love and affection and care and desire to be present does not change. And that's just a wild, beautiful picture of love and parenting to me.
Yeah, totally.
I have a question for Obs. I've never asked this question before.
Oh no.
But I was just thinking about it as you were saying that, like, because I was trying to think if I'm not anxious about my kids following Jesus or not, even if it's like a different brand of Christianity that I'm in right now. Because I grew up Catholic. I have a pretty broad tent, so I'm like, yeah, fine. Like,
imagine your kids being complementarian.
Oh, that would be we would have some words. I would have to like, okay. My own judgment just came out.
I should have given you more specific examples and had your answer.
My own judgment came out. I apologize to all my PCA and actually 9 friends. Obs, what are you anxious about for our kids' future?
Yeah. Well, I do have, when I think too much about it, if I move outside of like thinking about my specific child and I just think about the whole experience of the school that lays in front of them, I mean, that gives me anxiety. Absolutely. Like, what are they going to be exposed to at school? And are they going to make good decisions? Or are they going to make decisions that are going to impact them for the rest of their lives? I think that's the thing that probably scares me the most. Not that there can't be redemption and love and beauty in that, but there's a lot of things that you can do in your teenage years that can impact you for the rest of your life. So I hope they make silly, stupid decisions that, get them in trouble or whatever. And I hope that they don't make decisions that, are going to impact their brain development for the rest of their life, or, things like that are you're never undoing, that you then live with that forever. I think that gives me pause. Like, at some point I have no control over that. Like, they are going to be in situations where they are going to have to make decisions, and I don't know what they'll choose.
Right. Yeah. I think that similar things, like mine was like, as I was starting to think about it, I'm like, the thing that gives me actual anxiety is like if one of my kids gets addicted to drugs. Yeah. Like that. And I've heard so many stories, and just being like, oh my gosh, like that is the thing that gives me anxiety. And I think out of that, not out of a fear-based mentality, but like just the idea of that's why it's so important for us to create environments of dialogue and conversation.
Yes.
Because we want them to be like even with like alcohol, like sometimes like they'll like Selah or Jonah or someone like, can I have some wine? And I'm like, yeah. Do you want a taste of it? Like, no, because I just want to remove the taboo around it. Yeah. Let's just talk about it. Totally. Let's just have a conversation about it. And so same thing with any other philosophies or religious traditions or like alternate forms of ethics. Like, we just talk about it as a family. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that when I do feel anxious about things, the easiest thing to do is just to put it off the table, right? Like I remember when we first started talking about sex, and I am notoriously giggly when it comes to talking about sex. Like one of the kids asked about what circumcision was, and I was just like laughing and like probably turning red. I don't know why. And I was like, Gary, you're gonna have to answer this. And Gary just swooped in with like, just straight up answered the question. And I was like, I have to deal with this. Like, I mean, it's okay if I'm giggly or just own it.
Male anatomy in general. Yeah. Like one time she's like, we were starting to like do diapers. She's like, oh, Gary, you're going to have to teach me how to clean the poop off of his penis. I'm like, do you think I have a lot of experience cleaning poop off of my own penis? Like,
that's right. I remember you saying
am I pooping my pants frequently?
We're going to have to put a little E on this episode.
Whoops.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, but yes, so the best or the easiest thing just is to avoid it, right? Like, I don't want them to have this experience, or right now, in it. I don't know if I'm allowed to go here, but in the Bellingham Public Schools, a big topic of conversation right now is on gender identity, right? And that's something that I don't necessarily have concrete views on. I don't have, I can't articulate to my kids and explain everything to them. I do not consider myself an expert on this topic at all. And so the easiest thing to do would just be to kind of avoid it. But what I recognize is that if I avoid a conversation with my children, they are going to form their own views, and my silence will be communicating something. Yeah. And I become an off-limits person to talk about that with. So I have to be able to say, I don't know. This is new to me. This is not something that was talked about when I was in school. I just engage in it with them, and I'm going to fumble through it. And most of the time I'm going to have to come back later and amend something or apologize or I don't know exactly. But if I don't engage, I think that is communicating a lot to the kids. So I have to deal with it myself a lot.
And I would say the only other thing, I think actually, Kenny, when you asked that question, it actually triggered something in me that I just was reflecting on was it is, I think the other thing I'm most concerned about is that they get involved in the version of Christianity that everyone else is deconstructing right now.
Right.
There is, meaning the hyper-nationalist, hyper-binary version of Christianity that was pushed so much, at least for when I was younger. I was spared from it. I grew up Catholic. Aubrey actually she didn't really grow up in a culturally Christian home either. And so those things were foreign to me until later. But that is something I'm concerned about. And I think something that Aubrey and I talk about frequently. And that's what we mean is there's versions of Christianity we don't want them to have to unlearn, because we were watching the unlearning process, and it's utterly damaging for a lot of people, because inevitably they are going to have to do it.
Of course.
20 to 50% of what I'm teaching them is probably wrong. And they're going to have to unlearn that and figure out what the Holy Spirit is revealing and working in them specifically, in their context as they take on the mantle of following Jesus. And so that is something that we do actively talk about frequently when I'm at our dinner conversations and things like that, but we don't talk about it in the sense of what not to do. We're trying to give them the most beautiful picture of Jesus that we can fathom.
Yeah.
Man, you guys are good. I'm telling you, Molly and I are over here snapping
up the wisdom.
We are fumbling through this parenting journey for sure.
Well, I think because we get to see it too. So hearing you guys say these things, we get to have glimpses of your parenting and your family, and so it means so much more. I don't know, it just is real. We see you guys do this and live it out, and so it's cool.
Yeah, and your kids are just the best too.
I concur.
We think they're pretty great.
I spend the most time with the girls because they come to you.
Yeah.
come with you to work the most. And I'm like, you're just so cool. Like you're 10 times cooler than I was at your age. I can't even imagine what you're going to be like when you're in your 20s.
We're like on video calls or whatever, and Garrett's at home and the girls are like sewing, and like Sayla's like behind you, like cooking like her, like the meal for everybody.
Just completely independent. Little. They're so cool.
But then he always does say, "That's all Aubrey."
Yeah, he does.
It is all Aubrey.
Credit where it's due. Well, let's end with maybe you can choose if you would prefer to share a way for people to find rest if they're also feeling anxiety. Like I was sharing that I kind of do, and I know Molly has said that she has a little bit of that too around like raising kids someday. If you have a way to find rest, or maybe like a practical rhythm or tradition around like Bible reading or prayer or something that you employ, or like for Molly and I, like that we know we want to employ someday or think we might want to employ someday. So either a way to find rest or some kind of practical practice to do with kids around faith.
I'll go the practical way first.
That's very fitting. Garret is the practical aspect of our family. And I like to, keep it flitty.
As you heard,
flighty.
When you heard Aubrey talking about her spirituality, like she is a mystic at heart. Like at the heart of her spirituality is profound mysticism that is so beautiful. And it's really great. Like it's actually, it really is. Like, so even in some of the things that I'm about to talk about right now is like, it's always so helpful to have Aubrey around to talk about it, because I become very pragmatic and practical and like things. But then she's like, but you could also just pray in the color blue. And I'm like, I don't know what that means.
I haven't said that in a long time.
I know.
That is an amazing Aubrey quote.
The first time you said that, like something about Aubrey praying in colors, and I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is helpful because as you guys all work with me and everyone listening to this, like here, I'm just more of an analytic person. Like I'll come at things in different ways, but it's so helpful to have a mystic in the house because it like helps me rest in that mystery, which has been really helpful.
And it's helpful to have a practical person in the house because
otherwise everything is just the color blue.
Or disorganized and
dream team.
There's no plans.
So here's what I would say is that rhythms in your family life, in our family life, especially as it's gotten bigger, has been so helpful. And I think for a long time, because I didn't have it to offer, but I was more hands off, and I was just like, oh, Aubrey does that well, and she thinks about all of those things. And I actually think that within the last 4 or 5 years, as I've kind of taken on more of that role, I've created more of a family rhythm for us that I think has really greatly benefited us. And I think Aubrey started seeing that too, and there was a necessity around we homeschool our kids, obviously, and and because of all of that we do create rhythms. And so there are 3 rhythms that I would want to highlight.
Oh, nice 3-point plan.
Yeah. And I'll move them through like where we are in our family. I would say a nightly rhythm at dinner together as frequently as you possibly can.
Like eating dinner together.
Yes, eating dinner together and having a prayer time together. Ours is very chaotic, but we have a family prayer that we've sung on my side of the family since I was in preschool. So we always sing that prayer as a family. And if the kids have it to offer, we always go around and say, we'll read a scripture passage. They'll say one thing that they thought was interesting from it, and then we move on.
Will you sing the prayer?
God our Father, once again, thank you for our blessings. Amen. And then there's a big amen. 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 Yeah. Every time. And so some version of that, sometimes we're able to do it, sometimes we're not. But the biggest thing is always have it be a positive experience. That if we see that the faith experience isn't going to be positive, we keep it at the bare minimum. We never force them to. One of the things that we say around the prayer is you don't have to sing, but you do have to hold hands. And sometimes they don't do that, but then we're like, then you have to be okay with someone touching your shoulder. Like you have to be okay with that. So that's one. And I would say we do that pretty frequently. The second is doing some intentional time specifically with kids around the Gospels. I'm less good at that. That goes and fits and starts in our seasons, but there are seasons where we're like drawing the scripture passages, we're writing really interesting things, but just getting your kids to know the story of Jesus. You don't need to get them to know the Bible. That's not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is getting them to know the story of Jesus. So when someone is able to tell them, someone asks them what a Christian is, they can just say, I know the stories of Jesus. Like I literally don't know of a more Christian response than that. I just know the story of Jesus. And the third thing is, and this is the thing that this is aspirational for us, is Sabbath. That a rhythm of work and rest. When we have been able to press into it as a family, we all notice a different version of our family emerge. It's easier to do in the Pacific Northwest in the spring through the early fall.
Certainly.
Because we can, on our Sabbath days, we can go out in our garden, we can be outside and things. And so in these months that we are in right now in the winter, the Sabbath, I think, is the hardest thing, but that would be the third thing.
Love that. Thanks for those. That's really helpful. That's awesome.
I think for me, what comes to my mind is we were talking about this, but like I think about aspirational parenting goals like a weird amount. Like I just feel like I'm often thinking about it. And I mean, I think for many different reasons, but what I had this thought, I'm sure I heard this from someone at some point, but a lot of it is probably centered around like who I hope to be as a parent and how I hope to, like what we were saying, more is caught than taught. Like a lot of it is in how we love and how we live. And so I'm like, well, I hope that I am this way or this compassionate or am able to navigate this situation well. And I've had the thought of like, oh, I hope when I'm a parent, I'm like this. I'm not like this right now, but I hope to become that. And what I realized is I'm becoming that right now. Mm-hmm. So whoever I want to be in the future, the person I am and the choices I'm making right now are I am becoming that person, mm-hmm. or I'm becoming a different version that's further away from that person mm-hmm. that I want to be. So, I mean, I was saying some specific examples, like what you were sharing, Aubrey, about like being able to have those difficult conversations that maybe are easier and more comfortable to avoid. Like, I really hope to value that one day in my family. And so I'm like, how am I navigating that right now in relationships or for myself? Or my relationship with technology is something that I think about. Like, how do I think about and pay attention to that right now if I hope to mm-hmm. someday, if I have a family, navigate it in a particular way? So I would say encouragement and to find rest for those of you who are listening that aren't parents or that hope to become parents one day is if you have these hopes or dreams or goals for who you are in your family as a parent one day, I would just say the person you are now and the person you're becoming will be that person. Mm-hmm. So think about that stuff now. It doesn't have to be something that's just far away and when you get there one day, but it is like you are constantly being formed. Mm-hmm. So pay attention to how you're being formed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hear that a lot for people that are preparing for marriage. And we talk about it even on the podcast a lot, just around your faith in general, of like the habits that you have now and the thought life choices you make now and the relationships you're cultivating now are like, they will continue on that same trajectory unless you change it.
Right.
So you have to look down the trajectory of your current habits.
Yeah. It's so easy for me to think like, oh, when I'm married or when I have kids, I'll be like this. Yeah. But then I'm like, why would I think that if I'm not like that now?
Yeah.
It just, that doesn't just
It's only going to get harder.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's been helpful for me just to kind of orient myself.
That's really helpful.
That is really good, Molly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing I'll share is uber practical. But when I got married, my husband grew up in a home that had a really big emphasis on faith and following Jesus and learning about that. And so he had a lot more has a lot more actual knowledge about the Bible than I do. I would say I'm also more of a mystic at heart. And that has been really enriching and has made us think a lot about kids, because what he's done is, specifically around holidays, actually changed a lot of how I see what are quote unquote Christian holidays like Easter and Christmas, has sort of helped us adopt practices around that have made me see those holidays in 10 times more meaningful ways. He last year, for the first time, but I've told you guys this a couple times, like, been one of the most profound experiences of my life, did a Passover meal for us and wrote a whole thing about it. And it was incredibly profound, and it totally changed Easter for me, and actually a lot about my faith. And we have some things around Advent and stuff like that we do now too. And so that would be my kind of practical encouragement, is taking sort of the liturgical church calendar and looking at what it might look like to, in your marriage or with kids or whoever your family is, to, recognize those and celebrate them maybe in ways that are different than kind of the commercialized ways that we celebrate holidays. It can be really meaningful.
Yeah, it's great. The thing that came to mind as I was listening to you, I'm not sure quite where this came from, but a memory popped into mind of a friend of mine who's a little bit older than me and has kids a little bit older. And then she shared something from a friend of her who actually at the time had like grown teenage 20-year-old kiddos. And the oldest of us moms was talking about how in her parenting career, she has done every single thing she swore she would never do as a parent. Like, let her kids stay up late all the time, or, given something to a kid, even though they're screaming for it, or I don't know what those things are as they get to be teenagers. Those are the things that scare me. But it was gone to a crying baby when you said, we're just going to let him cry, right? So when I heard that, there are so many times in my parenting world where I set a boundary and it becomes more about the boundary than it becomes about the child. Yeah. And being able to simply let that go and meet that child where they're at, even if their behavior is completely inappropriate. And I think that while that sounds kind of overwhelming to think about, like letting go of anything you ever thought you would hold on to, there's also a lot of freedom in that, because it doesn't mean that I have to have it figured out. Like, it's okay if I say one thing and then in the moment I just let it go and I show up for my kid. And I think that that's the thing that I come back to when things are really hard, and I have to just I'm going to let go of my own pride in this, and I'm just going to be here with you, even though you're really not being very nice to me or whatever it is. Oh, go ahead.
All I was going to say is that's the most, that's literally, I think, how you just preach the sermon on grace. Because I think that's literally God just says I do not want this for you. I had a boundary around this for you, and you transgressed that, and I'm going to let that go. But I'm going to not because I don't believe in the boundary, but because I value presence.
Yeah. There is nothing that should ever stand between my relationship with my child.
Yeah. Let's go.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.